to think that black people couldn't be seduced by capitalism, by white proximity, is to not think of black people as human.
Yeah.
Like, it's a human thing. It's not a good thing, but it's a human thing to sort of want to get to the place that gives the prizes, that gives the rewards.
Of course.
And so, yes, the politically, I'm very much like, but over here is way better, right? Why head in the direction? And you know, my
seeing
background,
through the hype.
Right, yeah, seeing through the hype.
Whoa, that was crazy. That was what this show is about. We are here live. Another episode 4 of See Through the Hype. Today we got someone special today. Someone that I don't think you guys are really prepared to understand the gems he's about to drop. This man is really a life-changing individual. If you ever got the chance to meet him, you guys can say the same thing. I took a class sophomore year, English class with my professor right here. You guys will see him soon. We're not going to announce him yet until my intro is done. Took a class with him sophomore year, and it was by far one of the greatest English classes I've ever got. Because we learned about our cultural history while reading books. And I never got that. I never got to really learn about different cultures inside of English class. I usually learned that in an elective history class. And he was able to bring that in English and actually make me attend class. And if you guys know me, I really don't be attending class at all. I'm sorry. GPA might say otherwise, because I am excelling. Shout out my parents. But if you ever got the chance to meet this guy, you guys would be able to say that you are blessed. Mr. Chetty changes lives all around. Constantly, I see him on the St. John's page being congratulated for his work. And we will go and dive into why that's such a big accomplishment once we kind of dissect the roots of our institution. And so, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the greatest professor, we can argue about that later, to ever walk this earth. I'm blessing you guys with the presence. Thank me later. I need everybody to make some noise for Professor Raj Chetty. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
That's really too much. That's gracious. I really appreciate it. I'm humbled. I'm flattered. I don't know what to say. You put me on the spot there, but I appreciate it. Thank you, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for this invitation. It's a real pleasure. So thank you, Michael.
And to kind of dive in and dig in, if you guys don't know, Mr. Professor Chetty is the head of the Cultural, Racial, Ethnic Studies Department. A little bit different. So there's critical race and ethnic studies. So CRES. And there's a group of us who've been working on it. Pretty much this whole academic year, and then there's a number of people who were working on it the past year too. COVID messed things up a little bit, but it didn't knock it down. And the faculty member who's really leading the efforts is Professor Natalie Byfield in sociology and anthropology. Shout out Professor Natalie Byfield. Wonderful, she's a wonderful professor, and there's a group of 10. I want to say 10 of us. Faculty, administrators. It's just a solid group of people who are committed to making this work happen. So we're from different departments, right? So I mentioned Professor Byfield in sociology and anthropology. English. I'm in the English department. Shantae Small is in the English department. Arturo is a graduate student. He's not part of this specific group, but he's been working on these things in different ways. He's finished his graduate studies. Yep.
Yeah, he's done, right? He's done. He's a faculty member adjunct faculty member in the history department and other places. He's teaching multiple places. So we are. I mean, it's a good point because we are working with students, so undergraduate students over time that have been here, yourself included, but even going before for a number of years. Graduate students who've been involved in this kind of stuff, staff members at different positions in Office of Multicultural Affairs, and student affairs, and then administrators at different levels. So it's been really good to see sort of the way a broad St. John's community is coming together. And so there's other English department professors, there's theology and religious studies professors, there's pharmacy and health service professors, right? So there are people from across campus on the narrow team. Wow. And this is the small team that's developing the critical, but there's a wider group of faculty that are teaching classes, gearing up for classes. We know it's going to be a bigger group of people once everything is launched. So the thing we have launched so far is the minor. So the minor in critical race and ethnic studies
I saw it just got introduced a couple months ago.
That's right. That's brand new. It's an interdisciplinary minor. It's the first minor.
Shout out you too, because if I would have known about that freshman year,
yeah,
life might be way different now.
And it wasn't available freshman for you.
It wasn't. Yeah.
So this is and we're in the works is a major that's going through the process. So that doesn't exist yet, but it's going through the steps of going through. It has to go through the board of trustees here. It has to go to the state because it's a BA program. It has to meet certain state requirements. But that's all in process, right? So
I thought since a private school, you won't even have to go through all.
No, you have to do all that stuff. And well, I mean, you can, but then you don't get accredited. So then your degrees don't count, sort of, for the ways they should count.
Oh, wow.
So it has to go through the entire accreditation process. All the degrees here have to kind of go through that. So that's what we've been up to. So the immediate work is about a couple years. I in fact wasn't here last year.
Yeah, that's why I was about to go in. I know you went to San Diego State, and then you came back. And I will say that when he left to go to San Diego State, I felt like a part of me left. And Hannah can say the same thing. My friend Hannah and all the people who are very evolved around campus can say the same thing. It's like a piece of us left. Like, that was the change. Like, that was the person that was leading the change in our administration, at least in our eyes. Of course, there's other people that go in. But you left for San Diego State for a year, and then you came back. What was that process like? Did you come back because you heard about the development of this? Of the CRES?
Well, it's a little bit. So maybe I can't tell anything short. I'm gonna tell a shorter version of it. So that year, 2019, 2020, I was going up for tenure, right? So the thing that people sometimes do when you go for tenure is apply to other jobs, and some of that, and this is sort of like pulling the screen back, some of that negotiating, right? If you get another job offer, like you would another job, you can say,
you have leverage.
Then you have leverage. You say, hey, when I get tenure, I'd like a little bit more salary, or I'd like this, or I'd like a little bit of I'd like some summer research money. I'd like to direct this institute, right? So I was talking to my friends, right? People who already had tenure, people who in my department, outside of my department, people, my friends that were working with on this critical race and ethnic studies. I said, okay, what are the things what should I be thinking about when I'm, as I'm approaching tenure, if I get these other job offers? And honestly, like, this is now that I'm on the other side of it, like, I didn't want to leave. Yeah. I'm in New York City.
You got your family.
I'm in Queens. Yeah. Right. My whole family's been here since 2013. I study and research Caribbean literature and culture. I mean, there's no better Caribbean city than New York City, right? Everyone from the Caribbean is here, or people from all over the Caribbean, I should say, are here. So I was like, okay, but I got to make it look like I could leave, so that I could do this. And then a series of things happened that were like really disappointing on campus, and some not related to race and ethnicity in a real sense.
Logistics.
But all of a sudden, I was like, okay, maybe this is an opportunity to go somewhere else. Which is something I definitely didn't think when I was applying to jobs.
That's what I was assuming. I was like, not at all. That was like a surprise move.
No. I mean, I surprised
like
myself.
KD to the Warriors.
No, I said Barry.
I was like, wow, like you went over there, like you left us like out on the car. I thought you were staying. I mean, and you and me both, right? I thought I was staying. But I mean, it was San Diego's home. It's where I grew up. But that wasn't even really it. It was just a whole bunch of reasons, right? And part of the reasons included, finally when I got my head settled and people were helping me, mentoring me from this institution, people from outside this institution, like good people who were just like, here are some things to think about. Here's how you present yourself. One professor who was the chair, Jennifer Travis in the English department, said the advice I got was, when you have an opportunity to negotiate, dream and then ask for it. Like, what's your dream job? That's crazy. And then ask for it. I was like, oh, I had never thought that big. That's crazy.
And so I said, salary is nice. Some extra research money is nice. Those are the easy ones, right? Like, okay, those
you
are
get research money as it's
you can, right? Summer research money usually, I was like, so I can ask for those things, and they can say no, but I can say I want this and I like this. And that's part of the negotiation process, right? But then the thing that I was really, and this is, having worked with students, having listened to y'all, having worked with other faculty members, other staff, like this group that, since 2013, since I showed up, it was like these conversations we were having, and being inspired by students. I said, what? One of the things we don't have here is something where we study race and ethnicity. Wow. We have individuals doing individual things, and some of us we talk with each other. We have a group,
but there's no actual.
But there's not a formal institutional structure. And so at that point, I was at a place. I was going up for tenure. I was relatively young. I had developed good relationships across campus, where I said, okay, this is my dream job. I want to propose an institute, and I was going to call it the Institute for, the name was like, okay. And I talked with Professor Byfield, I talked with Nada Llewellyn, I talked with Manoush Castagnol, I talked with a number of faculty, a number of staff that I'd already built relationships with. I was like, hey, here's what I want to do.
That's crazy.
I'd like some advice. What do you all
created
think?
The ultimate team,
right? And so I put the proposal together, but it's really represents the work of a number of people who sort of gave me feedback, who saw drafts of it, who had been giving me input over the number of years. teachers, including students. And I keep harping on that, but I'm like, this is something where we're following you all. Like, you all are like, hey, we want some things, we demand some things.
I'm glad you guys recognize. I'm glad teachers are able to recognize. For those that are out there, now that people aren't really informed about what CRES is, critical race ethnic studies, a lot of people don't know what it is. Can you tell us, what does it consist of? What is taught during it?
Yep.
Right? And what motivated you to pursue that?
Yeah. So I'll go
with
in
your
the order.
career.
Yeah. I'll go in the order that you asked it. Right. So there are just different what would be called interdisciplinary fields of study. Right. These are the academic words for it. The disciplines that we think of as not quite interdisciplinary, like biology, it's its own discipline. English, it's its own discipline. Interdisciplinary fields are like environmental studies. It's like across different, like might be biology and chemistry and maybe even in the humanities. So race, critical race and ethnic studies, there's no field by that exact name. There's an ethnic studies field. There's a critical ethnic studies field. There's critical race theory that gets taught. Usually it starts out of law and education where it's like been really sort of built, but it's sort of everywhere else in academia. And now in sort of more popular ways, right? So then even the former president will say like no more critical race theory in any federal situation, right? Because they had a dumb understanding of what that actually meant. But the basic definition underlying all of those things, and there are important differences. There's a difference between ethnic studies, critical ethnic studies, Black studies, Asian American studies, Native American or Indigenous studies, Latinx, Latino, Latina.
Would you say, though, it incorporates all those fields?
In a real sense, CRES, what we're trying to do is think across these already interdisciplinary fields, right? And we're not just doing this thing where like, okay, we have a sociology professor and we have an English professor, and each of us is just teaching our own disciplines. We're really trying to build something for our students that most of us didn't actually get trained in. We got trained in one discipline. Yeah. And it might have been that in that discipline we did Black studies, and that took us to multiple, that took us to sociology, that took us to history. But many of us were trained, we got our education, we got our PhDs in programs that were sort of monodisciplines. Yeah. Again, even if we're reaching out to other things, and so what we're trying to do with critical race and ethnic studies is develop for undergraduates. And then eventually graduate students, we want to build that out. But for undergraduates, something that already says, you're going to learn history, you're going to learn sociology, you're going to learn English, and you're going to learn things that combine all of those things. In a way that on some level doesn't exist. Yeah. And it does exist at some other universities, but it's really sort of a new way of thinking. Universities as disciplines sometimes are about breaking apart the study of things that in Black studies get thought together, right? So there are people in Black studies who study science, technology, feminism, race, all together. Right? There's like these neuroscientists who study race. And you're like, in other words, they're taking the humanities and they're taking science and saying, well,
that's beautiful.
That's what it's supposed to be.
That's the evolution. You're involved. That's
and in some ways, it's undoing university structures that try to separate things out and said, okay, those of you who do biology, stay over here. And biologists and math people are like, I don't know what this has to do about race. Yeah. Even professors are like, I teach math. That doesn't have anything to do with race. And I'm like, there's a real way. I mean, my brother's a math professor. He teaches at St. John's, but not this one. He teaches at St. John's in Minnesota.
Oh, okay. Wow. I was about to say he's here.
No, I know. It would have been. Like, another Dr. Chetty.
There's a St. John's up in there.
Right. And so he's recently been thinking about it. He's a math professor, right? He studies number theory. But he's recently been thinking, like, how do I think about it? He has some Black students, very few, at his university. He's like, how do I work with some of these math majors who are Black students to think about race and think about how we teach math, how we teach math in K through 12, how we teach math in college, and how these things reproduce certain racial hierarchies. That's a way of thinking of math as also part of this, right? It's not to say like, oh, race is over here and all these sort of regular disciplines are over here. And like race is for Black people, for brown people, for marginalized people, for people of color, and it's cool because it helps them see themselves. Now, that might be part of it, but it's really about like we're really trying to imagine a new way of understanding the world, a new way of understanding science, a new way of understanding the human. And it's not like we're not really not inventing it. There are people in the past, Steele R. James, we read in the class, Sylvia Wynter, Frantz Fanon. These are people who had always they were politically active. They were writing all over the place. They were doing plays. They were writing poetry. They were reading everything. and constructing a field that didn't exist.
And you know what's crazy? If you took the class, you'd be able to even understand further of how this all even correlates, and that's beautiful because that's so progressive and evolutionary.
Sure.
And also I want to break down because I feel like a lot of times you get a lot of backlash, right?
Yeah.
And you're fighting constantly with the institution over critical race. Critical race and ethnic studies. Why? Why is this such a problem?
Yeah.
Is it? Do you learn in the class? Because you say it's debunking institutions. How are they taught? And of course, we know institutions are taught, as we talked about episode 2. A lot of it has to do with white. I wouldn't say suppress.
Yeah, okay, I would.
White supremacy. I just wanted to make sure it was okay. We said a lot of it was white supremacy, and white power is taught within a lot of these, and then we'll have to be basically breaking down.
Yeah.
White history is saying that this is not really the true history for all of us, and giving equal opportunity to learn our history and culture.
Yeah.
And so that will
But no, I mean, and this is. I mean, there isn't. I mean, this is gonna be.
And before to even add on the end, people are saying during the class, are we bashing white people the whole time, or are we actually trying just to come to a comprehension?
Right. I mean, you're in the intro. So the critical race and ethnic studies minor, the one that already exists, right? It has it's 15 credits, and it has 3 required courses. Introduction to critical race and ethnic studies. That's a brand new course. The first time it's being taught is this semester. You're in that class.
Okay.
And it's being taught again in the fall. Introduction to critical race and ethnic studies. So for people who are like, I don't know what the hell that stuff is. Take the introduction class, and then you take it. You're like, oh, this is not for me. That's fine. At least you got that sort of introduction instead of like this popular understanding. Oh, it's that thing that's teaching everybody that white people suck. And I'm like, well, if by white people we mean people whose whiteness gives them assigned privilege, then that sucks.
Yeah.
Right? But if we're talking about whiteness as a certain kind of property or as a certain kind of form of like existing or understanding the world, it's Eurocentric, that says civilization comes from the West and the West is defined narrowly as just Western Europe, then whiteness sucks, right? Now, to hold on to whiteness, when you're really trying to hold on to Irishness or Italianness or Germanness, is to confuse nationality and race. Right? So we're not telling German people you suck.
That's crazy. Wow.
We are saying whiteness is a category that develops in a way that says it's at the top. And blackness and sometimes indigeneity are either at the bottom or almost both at the bottom or simultaneously right there and often pitted against each other. And then there's sort of a kind of like a hierarchy of like sometimes Latinx folks are at the bottom, but also Latinx folks sometimes are white, right? So there's white Latinos who get all the sort of advantages, get all the structural dominance that accrues to being white in their respective societies.
And so you believe in colorism, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That's colorism at its finest, what you just described. That was just interesting that you said it and you broke it down like that because I never understood it like that. But now,
within the structures of white supremacy, it's how close to whiteness can you be?
One more time for the people out there.
How close? And this is where it's going to get hard.
Say that one more time for my people.
White supremacy is about how close to whiteness you can be. So even in a society, so the region of the world that I study that I think is beautiful and teaches us so much about stuff, the Caribbean, it's a majority black place. Right? And that's not sort of radical thinking. But even in the Caribbean, white supremacy operates, even in societies that are 85, 90% of African descent. Where white supremacy is how far away from blackness can you get and how close to whiteness can you get. So that for some people in the Caribbean, you may be ascribed to something like a functional whiteness and look like me or look a little bit less light-skinned or dark-skinned, right? But your proximity, because it's tied to class, because it's tied to color, because it's tied to sort of respectability, you might get certain advantages that allow you to sort of dominate other sectors of society that historically are the bottom. And then thus in Caribbean society, generally speaking, as with the rest of the world, the lighter you are, that you tend to be sort of, again, hierarchically placed. Does it mean that there are no black people in the Caribbean who are at the top? No, of course not. Just like it doesn't mean in the United States that there are no black people at the top. Right? Or that there are no sort of lighter-skinned people at the bottom. No. But generally speaking, the structural white supremacy pushes darker and poorer, which almost always overlap toward the bottom, and lighter and wealthier, which almost always overlap. And when I say almost, again, statistically, generally, obviously, people can point to expect, like, what about this black person? What about Jay-Z? He's famous. I was like, okay.
What about it?
What about Obama? He's like, okay. But these exceptions prove the rule of structural dominance of whiteness, right? They don't disprove that structurally over 500 years it's been a development of Eurocentric and white supremacist structural dominance. Economically, geographically, politically, like all those sort of culturally. One of the things there was a student, and this is just as a term, sort of the racist term that is illegal immigrant. And there was a student who's like, but I mean, if people came here illegally, he's like, is that? And this was a student who was asking. It was a real question, right?
Of course.
He wasn't asking a FU question.
Yeah.
He was like, no, okay,
a genuine question.
He was like, he's like, because maybe he came from a world where but legally, that's literally, people come and they cross illegally. That's they're immigrants who are here illegally. I was like, what's the image of the illegal immigrant? Is it a white person from Estonia?
No.
Is it an Irish person who has overstayed their visa?
Islam from Syria.
Right. It's a brown. In other words, it's a racialized category. And then he's like, okay, yeah. I was like, I asked the class, I was like,
that is crazy.
What is the image of the illegal immigrant?
That is crazy.
When that phrase comes up, what's the image?
What is the image of the illegal immigrant? That's so powerful.
And he's like, oh, okay. Yep. I mean, in other words, and it wasn't to say you're racist.
Yeah.
It's to say that when this phrase, as an example, comes up, it's already built into a racialized structure such that a British person who has overstayed their visa is never going to be called an illegal immigrant if they're a white British person.
You're right.
Right? It's never going to be the thing. And again, obviously, numerically, there are more people who are unauthorized in the United States or more people who are undocumented that come from, say, Mexico or Central America or Latin America. Or Haiti, right? But numerical doesn't matter. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the structure that produces an idea and an image of who is that category. And when it's racialized, then you're like, all right, we got to let go of that term then. Because it's got racist implications already built into what image it produces in us, right? Similar, like when we think of a term like terrorist, there's already a ready-made image because of the reproduction of these narratives. It's a Muslim, it's a person with a beard, it's a male, it's someone from the Middle East, someone with a turban, right? And then the target's related. Or as we just saw, the dirtiness, the image of the dirty immigrant. The one who's bringing disease.
Yeah.
And then we have the Atlanta shooting.
Yeah.
Right? So those images, those rhetorics, those legal sort of proclamations, those Supreme Court cases, all of them combine to create a racial category. And that then groups an entire group of people under the category of that race that then becomes attackable, removable, killable. You can treat them as less than the full human that they might be when they've racially categorized as some deviant category.
So when when slaves were brought from Africa to the Caribbean during the triangular
triangular,
and to the United States, right? This is because I have a lot of a white audience that's trying to learn and trying to gain it. So for them, can you break it down? Because for me, from an outside perspective, it wouldn't make sense if people come over here from slaves. Why would they want to be like the people that they despise? This whole when they want to come together more.
Sure.
And so how did that work? How did you get to the point now in the Caribbeans? If you're lighter tone, that's better. If they were brought here and they were told to despise, how does that even work? This is a conspiracy. There's no way.
This doesn't make any sense. I mean, it is again. If we understand white supremacy as a global project, if we understand Euro dominance, Eurocentrism as a global political project that touched everything, right? It hit culture, literature. If what Europe was successful, and I don't mean this in a good way, in doing was narrating itself under guns and under literature to the center of the moral and civilizational universe. Wow. It said, we're it. Everybody else, there were two ways of thinking about it. Well, there were probably more than two. Either has to catch up to where we are, they become civilized, or they're never going to get there. They're never going to get there. They're never going to get there, right? So some racists said, Africans have no history and they're never going to get it. It's a race of people designed by God, by genetics, by whatever the hell reasons they came up with, designed to perform X function. Enslavement, a certain kind of manual labor. They're not thinkers, right? They don't produce history. That was one version. Another version is they're just not there yet.
Yeah.
right? Both of those are racist.
Just because.
One is more like we Europeans have the burden, right? The white man's burden of educating and bringing civilization that we've now attained to these brown and black people in India, in East Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, right? In these indigenous peoples. Our job as the pillars of civilization, the narrative went, was to bring it to them. So then you can understand that when certain black and brown people achieved a degree of white recognizable, European recognizable civilization, they would say, whether this was right or wrong, they would say, see, we're civilized too. And often would point to other people from within their own sort of racial identity group and see, we're not like those Rastas. We're not like those backwards, right? Today we're in New York, right? The ratchet, right? We separate ourselves. We separate ourselves from their music, from their religious practices, from their Africanness. And that's again, it's a sad, perhaps, but understandable story. When white supremacy and European civilization become the pinnacle, and people are like, well, that's how we make it, then there are going to be people who are both attracted by and rewarded by, and understandably will want to head towards there. It's where the rewards are. Is it a good thing? No. Do we wish, and there are absolutely moments of people sort of saying, I understand that's that's where the prizes are. But I'd rather build community over here to imagine a different kind of world. And these are the two things critical race and ethnic studies are trying to do. It's trying to point out how white supremacy has done all this stuff and how black people, brown people, indigenous people have always collaborated, found ways to resist, even as there's some of them who join this other team, so to speak, right? Even as some take the bait, some consent or benefit from. I know that this is where I come from, but now that I've gotten out of that, I'm going to turn my back on it, right? So that happens. And on some level, it's human. It's actually a way of understanding. Like, one of the ways I think about this is to think that black people couldn't be seduced by capitalism, by white proximity. It's to not think of black people as human. Like, it's a human thing. It's not a good thing, but it's a human thing to sort of want to get to the place that gives the prizes, that gives the rewards. And so, yes, the politically, I'm very much like, but over here's way better, right? Why head in the direction? And my
seeing
background,
through the hype,
right? Seeing through the hype.
Whoa, that was crazy. That was what this show is about.
Yeah, good. Well played. You did right on that.
That was great.
You did right.
That's literally seeing through the structures of society, of how we're taught all our lives, of institutions, of structure. That's crazy.
That's good. No, you did right. And the way to think about it is like, white people don't get off the hook for heading in that direction either. Like, there's an invitation to white people to go there. And for a lot of white people, the difficult thing to see is like, oh, I've been invited and I don't even have to think about the invitation to participate in white supremacy. The invitation for other people, you have to think about it.
You have to be invited.
Right, but there's an invitation to white people. It's like, okay, how do I disinvite myself? How do I say F you to this invitation? How do I say, okay, where are my commitments to creating a different kind of world where whiteness isn't the privileged category, where whiteness isn't the dominant structural sort of identity project, if that makes sense. And so that it's a way of saying, if we're confused by people who have been oppressed heading over to sort of the oppressor's camp, I think it makes sense to be sort of like, why would people do that? And I agree. I'm like, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, it's weird. But it's another part of me is also like, but it should be confusing that white people head over there too. In other words, there's not something where it's like, just because white people benefit from it, just because white people are structurally dominant, that we should expect them to go there. Like, we should expect no one to go there. And we should point to the things that are like all about how do we think different worlds together? How do we we
think different worlds together?
That's it.
United.
That's it. And that means multiracial, that means coalitions, that means sometimes hanging with people who might not have the exact same politics, but are at least saying, we don't want that. And it's like, so
understanding the reality,
right? We're going to disagree about something, but the thing we can agree about is that white supremacy sucks, and it needs to be dismantled, and something else needs to be in its place, and that's something else. I mean, we're reading in class this book, Robin D.G. Kelly, professor at UCLA, Freedom Dreams, right? And what he's tracking across all those chapters is, how did people imagine and dream and try to create free worlds while being fully under sort of an oppressive system that would try to deny that freedom and deny that dreaming. So he's always like, where are the people who are making movements? And what are those movements teaching us about how to mobilize? And what are those movements teaching us about and there's a word that goes around a lot about resilience, and I get that, but part of me is like about like mobilizing. Resilience is good. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like resilience is a bad thing, but sometimes we forget that resilience is really about mobilization.
Yeah.
The getting up and getting together.
Oh, wow.
Right? It's not just the getting up. That's the resilience part. But it's getting up and then getting together to build alternative worlds, to imagine. Again, Dr. Kelly's sort of word is dream, to dream something different. And that's a long history. That's during the times of enslavement. That's during the times of post-emancipation societies in the Caribbean, in the United States, across Latin America. All of those dreams have kept having to happen because of the persistence of white supremacy's sort of anti-black racism, anti-indigenous racism, and its persistence. Right? It keeps happening. So it evolves, and so responses have to evolve. Yeah.
So I feel like I don't know if intersectionality was created from white supremacy, or it's just natural that races despise each other. Yeah. But if not or so, I feel like you say we all have to come together. But I feel like the more we progress, the more we not get divided, but it's like, why? Yeah. Why are we fighting?
Why are there still these breaks?
Yeah, and it's like slowly our people start, like you said, start becoming part of the, the whiteness in their minds. So what if 10 years from now everybody's like, why are we even what's the point of this? Like,
sure.
Why? Like,
sure.
We're past this, like, people are learning.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Yep.
So what if we get to that point? Because that's why I always see 20 years from now, boom, boom, boom. People are going to be so divided. People are going to call me a radicalist because I'm going to still be fighting stuff. They're like, this is not the 70s and 60s.
Yeah.
We
made
equality.
it.
We got equality. We got public. I like to call them PR stunts on this show.
Yep.
My politicians to just make things seem like it's going better when in reality you're not even getting to the root cause. You're just fixing things. Like banning chokeholds with cops, just per se. But so how do you think it can be dismantled? But I think the further we go, do you think the further we go, the more we'll get divided?